Now, the guy that is ever knowledgeable, passionate about the game we love so much. Everyone knows him all over North America and the world for that part. Ives Galarcep, Soccer by Ives. Ives, welcome Red Card again, friend.
Hey, Anthony, how you doing?
Hi, not too good today. A lot of people in the city of Toronto today, Ives, are really upset. There's a lot of people that are frustrated, a lot of people that are calling for the head of head coach Greg Vanney. I'm not one of them, but let's get your thoughts. You watched this game from down south. You saw how it all unfolded. You know the issues that TFC has had in their backline all season. But what was the most glaring thing to you that stuck out, aside from, the mistakes and errors from that back end, Ives?
Well, I think obviously the Jackson performance at right back was a pretty ugly one, and I really think that was kind of the big weakness there that Montreal was able to exploit. And if you're going to criticize Vanney, I think you can criticize him for that decision to play Jackson there as opposed to maybe a safer option, more defensive option, say a Marky Delgado or even, pushing Josh Williams to right back and playing Eric Zavaleta in the middle. One way or the other, Jackson just did not look the part, and it was pretty obvious from the very beginning. And if you're Greg Vanney, you have to kind of see that. You saw the way the game was developing, everyone could kind of see where Montreal was going, what was going to happen in that game, and Vanney waited too long, and by the time he was able to make the change at halftime, it was too little too late.
My concern is this, Ives. After that game Sunday, you would think the whole coaching staff Monday morning would watch the game from beginning to end, which I'm sure they did, and they had to say to themselves, or someone needed to stand up and say, hey, Greg, Jackson shouldn't be starting, neither Kantari. We discussed Jackson. Kantari, to me, was an absolute disaster, leaving Williams high and dry in that ball he gave him where he lost his footing. So to me, there's a guy that's making big money. And another guy, Ives, is Robbie Finley, who is making over $200K, did not, to me, earn his paycheck at all this year.
Well, Kantari, I'm still trying to figure out what the deal is with him because he didn't show me anything all year in any match I watched. I mean, he's looked pretty bad in every single game that I've seen him play in. And when you think about coming into the summer, they obviously needed some help defensively, and they go and pick up Kantari, who was, I believe, a free agent, right? I mean, he didn't have a team, so that should tell you something right there. And then you pick up Josh Williams, who'd been let go by NYCFC, and everybody knows NYCFC's defensive trouble, so they let him go. That where a bad defensive team won't even keep him, then you have to wonder about that. But something that kind of stood out to me in that whole thing, obviously Damien Perquis being hurt was huge for them. That's a big blow because I mean he's obviously a good player. But for me, what came to mind as I'm watching last night is the MLS draft. And I remember being at the MLS draft. Toronto FC had 3 picks in the top 11, and they made some picks that were head scratchers. And I remember at the time saying, well, I don't know about these picks. I mean, Clement Simonin was just completely out of left field. It was a pick that, it was clear they were trying to be smarter than they needed to be. I don't know anybody else that was going to take this kid. And, they pick him up. They pick Skylar Thomas, who I know is Canadian and has those ties. But you passed up some defenders who were higher rated, who were more highly rated, and who went on to actually do pretty well. Tim Parker for Vancouver has been excellent. You can't tell me he wouldn't help last night. Or Axel Schoberg for Colorado. Can't tell me he wouldn't help last night. So I think that's why the draft matters. And I know people in Toronto, I know there's some folks in Toronto who don't get the whole idea of the draft or why it matters, why it's important. But in this league where there's a cap and where you need a balanced roster and you can't waste roster spots, the draft matters. And I think at the end of the day, that draft, those picks, came back to bite them.
You're 100% correct. To me, 3 guys that are untouchable that I believe you need to build around are Cheru, Bradley, and Giovinco, if Giovinco decides to stay for another year. I understand unless he sees improvement in the back end with added quality defenders and the style of play that needs to change, who knows if he's back. But to me, the guy that I was really disappointed in big games when they really needed some secondary scoring was Josie Altidore. I thought Josie, to me, if he's honest, would say, look, I didn't have the season I thought I could have. Now, maybe that's because he didn't play in the position he felt comfortable with in some of the games, but I still think he needed to show up yesterday, and he didn't, Ives.
No, not at all. I mean, he was pretty invisible, and you just kind of wonder, is he a good fit with the pieces that are there? It's all well and good to want to go get all these high-profile players, but if they don't all fit together, you have to reconsider things. I mean, look at the LA Galaxy, same situation. They went and got they went and got Steven Gerrard, Gio dos Santos, and it all, but at the end it didn't all fit. So they have to reconsider maybe. Same thing with Toronto. You have a Giovinco, and at no point this year did I really see Giovinco and Altidore clicking on a consistent basis. So you ask yourself, is that a good partnership? Is that something that you want to stick with going forward? Because that's a big decision there. Because if you're going to get rid of one of them, well, you're only going to get rid of Altidore, but if you're not going to keep them both, then Altidore is going to be the one to go, right? So I don't know, man. I think maybe Tim Bezbatchenko will have to think about that and ask himself, maybe this just isn't a good fit, and maybe I need to move Altidore. I'm sure there are teams that would take Altidore. He's a very good player. But I just don't know with the personnel there in Toronto, I don't know if he's a good fit.
So TFC, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment wake up this morning, and now the offseason begins. I've said this, Ives, since day one. God bless Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. All they've ever done is sign the checks. All they've ever done is said, where do you need me? What do you need me to do as owners? And they've done it. They brought Defoe. They brought Bradley. They brought Giovinco. They've never interfered as far as I've known. They've been the ideal owner, almost like a Joey Saputo. So where do you go from here now in the offseason? Do you leave Vanny in for another year? Do you leave Bezbatchenko? Or do you change one of those two pieces?
Well, that's a good question. I think 1 year is 1 year enough with that tandem. That's where I'm always kind of erring on the side of not making quick decisions or not giving up on the project after just 1 year. I think there were some signs there, but I think at this point, if they make a decision and they get rid of Vanny, I don't think anyone could get too crazy about it. I get that they made the playoffs, but making the playoffs was the bare minimum. With the roster they had, getting in as the 6th seed in the playoffs, I don't know if you can hang your head on that and say, oh, that was this amazing accomplishment. You're supposed to finish in the playoffs. I think I had Toronto finishing 3rd just with the personnel that they had coming into the season. So Vanny, I'm not going to sit here and say he should be gone, but if they do move him on, you can understand why. As far as Bezbatchenko goes, I think you need to give him another offseason and see what he can do, and if he can make the tough decisions that need to be made with this roster. And if he can make those decisions, then I think we'll see pretty early on next year if it's a more balanced roster, if it's a more complete lineup that whoever the coach is can put together. Because we could see early on in the year that defense was going to be an issue with this group. So no one should be surprised by that. And I think this summer when they went in and got spare parts who weren't even upgrades, I think that was a big failing on their part.
And to me, as of this morning around 10, 11 o'clock Eastern time, I was informed from Italy, from a source where I trust, that don't be surprised if they go after a quality, big-name Italian defender, or they look in England or in Spain, but they will get a big-name quality defender. And I think that they will go knocking on the door again in Italy to satisfy the appetite of the fans. They hit a home run with Giovinco. Why not try it again? If they don't do that, to me, then Bezbatchenko will be judged on the draft, as you said, coming up, and the guys that he's going to keep. Let's talk about some of these guys. I would not keep Finley, Jackson. I would not keep Williams, Warner. I would clean out at least 3/4 of these guys and look at some guys that are available in the offseason. I talked about one guy, obviously, that was available at the beginning of the season that they didn't even give a sniff to. That was Marvell Wynn, a guy that could have at least been a solid starter and a serviceable vet for this team, and they didn't even go after him.
Well, yeah, he would have been good, obviously, especially in that series, whether right back or center back. I think he would have been an upgrade. This offseason is going to be interesting. What's funny to me is that Toronto actually has a lot of young talent in with the USL Pro team, with the USL team, and guys coming up. So, are any of these guys going to be ready? Scarlett Thomas, Chris Manella. They've got some guys. You know the talent that they have coming up. So you ask yourself, are any of those players ready to step up? Or are you going to just keep going and hitting the international market and never giving your young players a chance? I think there needs to be a bit of a balance on that front. I think they need to have some of those guys from the USL program come in. They need to bear fruit in that regard. So an Italian or an international defender definitely has to be number one on your list. You need to go get a different, and whether it's Europe, whether it's Central America. Look at Vancouver, Kendall Austin. He's a guy who there wasn't a ton of fanfare when he was signed, but look at him now. The guy, you could argue, he's the defender of the year. and it's not like he's making a ton of money. So do you have to go to Europe and get $1 million center back? Not necessarily, but you do just need to put in more of an effort. Because look, hey, Kansari, when he came in, he had a bit of a resume. I mean, he had been at PSG at one point. He played in France. So, Bezbachenko that's project number one. That's step one. Get a center back you can build around, because they don't really have one right now.
Let me ask you this very quickly before we let you go. A couple things. One, we're going to talk about Montreal and give them the credit that they deserve. But before we get to that, the new president of TFC, Bill Manning, do you believe he will now, after this loss, I mean, we heard what he had to say when he was brought on, that he likes stability, he doesn't want to change things, he wants to build with guys, yada, yada, on and on, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe after digesting that loss yesterday and the way it all went about, maybe now he rethinks things. Do you think that Bill, in the years that you've known him, will make some changes after witnessing what he saw?
Well, I think it depends on what's out there, who's available. I think he's not going to make a change for change's sake. Now, having said that, if there are options out there that are more attractive, then he'd be crazy not to consider it. And if NYCFC, as I'm hearing, is going to make a change, if they're going to get rid of Jason Kreis, then you got to think Bill Manning and TFC will be in that line of teams who will at least try to talk to Jason Kreis. So the latest that I've reported for Goal.com was that Fabio Capello is talking to NYCFC. Nothing's done yet, but that's what I've heard and what I've reported. Now, if NYCFC gets rid of Kreis, which I personally think would be a mistake after 1 year, if they go sign a Capello, then Kreis is a guy who I think would be a great fit in Toronto. I mean, I think he's a guy who Kreis is a very good coach. He knows the league, and I think he's someone who can step in and make the changes that need to be made and get the most out of the roster. I know some people will look at his time at NYCFC and think, well, he didn't exactly do well there, but I don't know. I think that's a little unfair. I think that I think some things were forced on him in terms of the roster, in terms of the decisions that were made. I don't know how much control he had there or how much input he had there. So I think if Kreis is available, I think Manning has to at least consider approaching him and talking to him. Of course, there's going to be a few teams on that line. Ives,
just before we let you go, let's give credit here to the Montreal Impact. I've got a lot of friends on that squad, and I couldn't be happier for them moving on. But I got to be honest, I never saw this coming. I talked to a lot of them. They've had a very, very long year so far, going deep into the Champions League. Mentally speaking, the switch with a head coach, Drogba coming in, that has been outstanding. But I look at that midfield. God bless Patrice Bernier, Nigel Reo-Coker, and Marco Donadel. They're all in their mid-30s or early 30s. And they did circles around the guys of TFC last night. And Piatti, who doesn't play defensive, his life depended on it, scores with the best of them. To me, this is a dangerous, dangerous team now moving ahead against Columbus. You agree?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have a chance. I mean, I'm still picking Columbus, but having said that, I think Mauro Biello deserves a ton of credit. And it's not just about the results, but it's about what he was able to do in terms of managing the team, managing the roster and the lineup through what was a seriously congested schedule. And people don't realize just how tough that can be on a team and how you have to kind of balance minutes and make sure your team does not burn itself out. And Montreal absolutely could have burned itself out with such a tightly packed schedule because of the Champions League and all those matches that got pushed to later in the season. All everyone talked about was all games in hand. It's great to have games in hand, but when you have games in hand, it means you're playing every 3 days, every 4 days, and it's just going to wear a team down, especially in MLS where teams don't really have like huge depth. However, Biello, to his credit, he juggled his lineup, he managed minutes, he gave guys rest, and now you see a Montreal team that is so that they look fresh. They don't look like a team that just played 10 games in 30 days or whatever the crazy number was at the end of the season. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think he should absolutely keep the job. I mean, I know Joey Saputo might have ideas about other guys that, big name coaches he might be interested in. I'm sure he was interested in Capello, though I heard Capello wasn't interested in Montreal at whatever point they might have had discussions. But for me, I think Biello has shown that he can manage a team, and I think he should keep the job. Having said all that, I'm still going to go with the crew. I just think the crew, I just like their balance, and I just think that defensively they're going to have the discipline to deal with Piatti and especially Drogba. I think he's tough for anybody to deal with, but I think Columbus has the weapons in the attack, and the defensive stability now to win that series. But it's going to be great, man. It's a coin toss.
Ives, it's always great having you on.